The Wespener Papers. A Journey Through the Multiverse. The First Level of Learning. Wespener.com. Genetic Manipulation, GM, Section. GM Paper Number 5, Discussing the Anunnaki Papers. By Wespener, Sunday, April 24, 2011. 1. Abstract. Before you start reading this paper, you either need to know Zecharia Sitchin's work pretty well already, or have studied my previous Anunnaki papers number 1-4. If not, this paper will not make much sense, because the discussion herein is mainly about conclusions, questions, and comments around Sitchin's work, and the significance of the Anunnaki influence on our human past, present and future. So, if you haven't studied this subject previously, I strongly suggest you get familiar with it before you continue any further. 2. The accuracy of the Sumerian cuneiform clay tablets. The first thing we need to understand when we read Sitchin's work is that he translated the Sumerian tablets into modern language, drew his conclusions and found the coherency in it. That's all he could do. The tablets were written some 5,000–6,000 years ago, by the end of the era of the Anunnaki's 450,000 years reign, or more, on Earth. The Sumerians were able to write down what was happening to them in their own lifetime and perhaps a few generations back and still get it fairly accurate, but anything that goes further back than that is hearsay. In other words, whatever happened before that was told to them by the Anunnaki themselves. It means that it could be altered to fit the gods. After all, they wanted to make sure that humans respected them and followed their orders. Some of the tablets could also have been written by them, or human scribes, with the intention to mislead. Anything is possible here, so please keep your mind very open when you continue reading. Much of the information the Sumerians relied on, beside what the gods told them face to face, was the teachings that came out from Ea's secret society, the Brotherhood of the Snake, or the Brotherhood of the Serpent. This first secret society on Earth is the father of all secret societies that followed, and albeit we may not always know what the secrets are at the top of organizations such as Freemasonry, the Odo, the Rosicrucians, etc., we can assume that most of them have to do with the ancient gods, their knowledge in magic and the structure of the universe, as they knew it, and the return of the gods. The information has been passed down through all these generations. There is way too much evidence in Sitchin's, and other similar researchers' work to discard them. Other such researchers that should be mentioned are William Branly, Eric von Daniken, Robert Morning Sky, Andrew Thomas, Morris Chatelain, Harold T. Wilkins, Peter Colosimo, Serge Houghton, W. Raymond Drake, and Jacques Vallée. Albeit, Sitchin has his debunkers, such as Mike Heiser. At the end of the day, Sitchin still holds water. Some of what Sitchin claimed happened in the past has been verified by modern archaeologists. Besides, they also correspond, and build upon, other ancient, sacred scriptures, including the Bible. His work is also backed up by most metaphysical sources, through channeling and by other means. However, the Sumerian scriptures are telling only parts of the story, and are concentrating on certain areas of the planet, such as Mesopotamia, Egypt, South America, South Africa, Babylon, etc. And like we mentioned earlier, it's all from the Anunnaki's perspective. Another reason to give credit to Sitchin's work is because the gods are still here, and those from the home planet, Nibiru, are returning on their 3,600 years cycle, approximately around 2060 to 2095. More about that later. I have already mentioned the LPGC being in direct contact with the Nibiruans, but they are not the only ones. There are more people who have had face-to-face, close encounter of the fifth kind, with these beings, something we are also going to cover in depth later on. Another question readers may have: whether it's possible for planets to float around in space, like Nibiru did, before they are caught up by the gravity from a star system. Please read this article from NASA, science.nasa.gov web link. 3. Dr. Michael Heiser, Sitchin's main debunker. Just about everyone who is bringing some significant information out to the public have their debunkers. So also Sitchin, of course. The most famous of these debunker is perhaps Dr. Michael Heiser at sitchiniswrong.com. He has dedicated a whole website to debunk Sitchin and is also traveling around, holding lectures on this subject and others. Dr. Heiser is a linguist and claims that Sitchin's translations of the Sumerian cuneiform tablets are utterly wrong. Nowhere, says Heiser, is there any indication that the old Sumerians were talking about a 12th planet or an alien race. He says that he is an expert in this language and knows what he is talking about. Of course, someone who doesn't speak the old Sumerian language can't verify whether he's correct or not, even when he's showing his evidence. I'm not going to spend much time explaining what Dr. Heiser is talking about, you can check it out on his website if you like. One thing he claims is that Sitchin has made it all up like some kind of science fiction novel. This is of course not true, and often Heiser doesn't seem to know what he's talking about at worst, or he was not a linguist at all and made wild guesses and put a story together that seemed to fit without any credible evidence. When met with criticism, he often gets quite upset and is not convincingly managing to hold his position. There are NASA videos of the incoming planet. It was in the newspapers in the early 1980s, and as I said, the Anunnaki are even walking among us, seen and encountered by many credible people, including LPGC. In addition, we have a wealth of channeled information talking about this stuff. Speaking of LPGC, when Dr. Borden became aware of Dr. Heiser's debunking attempts, he emailed him the following response as a comment to Heiser's research. Heiser, of course, never replied. Email to Mike Heiser. May 16, 2011. Good afternoon, Mike. Just visited your blog, The Naked Bible, Eschatology. michaelscheiser.com web link. Took the time to read everything you have here, on your other site, The Facade, and borrowed a copy of your dissertation which I also carefully and thoughtfully read. After some careful consideration of what Sitchin said and did, and the scholarship with which he treated us through his Earth Chronicles, and the rebuttals you regaled us all in your websites which you so ably established sound basis in your dissertation, I came to realize two things. 1. The Nibiru phenomenon is a phenomenon that has become quite a meme in our culture as your stance and the people sharing their views and feelings on your sites indicate, indeed, throughout the world. And, 2, the scholarship that supports or denies the reality of the phenomenon is biblical and Sumero-Egyptologic, a fact that makes both sides, yours and Sitchin's, open to claims that both are based upon a. an interpretation of the historical record, b. a matter of expertise in ancient Near Eastern languages, and c. conclusions, being what they are. Hypothetical written pictures or models of a phenomenon, can be again highly interpretive of the records treated as data supporting a view. Through the prism used by the interpreter, Sitchin says it is, and you say it isn't. But the story does not end there. There is, as they say, a door number 3. This door is the one through which, wittingly or unwittingly, willingly or forced by circumstances, I am walking into this phenomenon. This is the door opened by experiencers who have come in contact with so-called Anunnakis. In my case, it occurred when I was 10 or 11 in South America, on the Parana River between Brazil and Paraguay, while fishing with my father northeast of Encarnacion, Paraguay. He and I were picked up by a triangular 6-man craft and, while my father was kept sedated via interesting non-biomedical means, I was not. This was the first of 3 encounters with the same individual who lead the first group on the Parana, and have since assisted the small scientific cooperative that LPGC has been since the early 90s with very advanced scientific information and the technology with which to get our own by the same, or similar means, they have for apparent eons. They called it the brilliance. According to Sitchin, we were more mundane in the naming, referring to it as simply the tank. We've been at it since 1998, when the first of 2 prototypes were completed, tested, and much to our amazement, found it to work exceeding all of our expectations. The results have been cumuli of information about how nature is and how nature works, from the infinite to the infinitesimal, and presented in some detail and with an historical sense of order on our new and improved website at www.lifephysicsgroup.org. To wit, we are in process of miniaturizing the key aspects of this apparatus, such that it could be used by qualified scientists wishing to explore the same nature we did. Oh, the surprises that await them! And we are not the only experiencers of these who call themselves SID.A.me. And you and Sitchin know as Anunnaki and fit the bill in appearance for the ancient Anunnaki and Ornithilim, the latter seeming human Anunnaki hybrids. There are others, and there are also others who are quietly pursuing face-to-face benevolent contact with giants in several places: South America, Southern Africa, and the Mideast. In a larger context, there is also an exopolitical framework which is impinged upon by the past, and which is the reason we now all need not scholarship proving one view or another, but rather a model of what we as humans face today and must literally face within 50 to 70 years from now. Whether or not Nibiru is a star or a planet or a comet, all of that is splitting hair. The IRIS pictures did not lie, and the current South Pole telescope data is showing the incoming as being quite real, and incidentally, proving Jim Kay's contentions out to be more certain that any fiction I could write, and have written, about. No, Mike, this is not fable, and it is not prehistory. Let me close this unexpectedly longer note than I intended by simply asking, 1. Whether or not you've ever experienced a face-to-face presence with one of these creatures, and 2. What would you do if you could? Kind regards, A.R. Borden. Borden also posted a slight variant of the above email on the same date, May 16, 2011, in Heiser's comments section. Borden sent this in 2001 and is still waiting for a response. michaelscheiser.com web link. 4. What about Atlantis and Lemuria? I feel I need to bring Atlantis and Lemuria into the picture as well. These 2 ancient civilizations were not mentioned in the previous Anunnaki papers, and they are not mentioned in Sitchin's work, either. This doesn't mean that those civilizations did not exist, they did. According to the Pleiadians, the whole Old Testament of the Bible, the story before the flood, is all about Atlantis. They say that the flood actually was the catastrophe that ended it and drowned the whole continent. But how does this interrelate with the Anunnaki and Mesopotamia? The Pleiadians say on different accounts that Poseidon was the first ruler of Atlantis. They also say, and we know, that Poseidon and Ea, the Enki, are the same being. He was Ea in Mesopotamia, Poseidon in Greece, Ptah in Egypt, and Neptune in Rome, same deity. They also say that Poseidon had Pleiadians connections. This does not correspond with Sitchin's work, but it does with researchers such as Robert Morning Sky and others, including myself, as I've pointed out in previous papers. A faction of the early Pleiadians came back to Earth and supported the Anunnaki in their effort to genetically manipulate mankind. In Sitchin's books it sounds like Earth is the only planet the SID.A.M.I visited, and they can do so because it's close to Earth every 3,600 years, 1 SAR. However, this species is not stuck in 3D and can travel interdimensionally and are using stargates and Einstein-Rosen bridges to go from one point in the universe to another. This is the most fundamental way of traveling through long distances in space, time. The Si.A.M.I are a warrior and a conquering race, and they have invaded other planets, both before and after Earth, as we shall see in the second level of learning. In a sense, Sitchin did not exclude Atlantis and Lemuria, Mu, from his writings, he just didn't mention them by name, because the Sumerians didn't. It was a term coined by Plato. They never called these empires Atlantis and Lemuria. The Palladians are most probably right when they say the At is actually describing Atlantis, and the time frame fits. Atlantis went under around 11,500 BC, which corresponds with the deluge. However, Sitchin's Earth Chronicles concentrates almost exclusively on Mesopotamia, Babylon, North and South Africa, and South America. But what happened in other parts of the world? And were there land masses in the Atlantic and the Pacific which correspond with Atlantis and Mu? The answer would be a confirmative yes. Why? Because ruins of these cities and cultures have been found deep under the oceans. It makes sense that these civilizations died with the flood. Were the Anunnaki in charge of these two lost continents? It certainly looks like it. Atlantis as an archetype may have also existed in a higher dimension. There will be a special paper on these issues, only the basic thoughts have been covered here and need to be expanded upon. 5. The Mars Findings. In 2007, Sitchin was pointing at new startling features on Mars that were discovered, which support Sitchin's research regarding Alalu being buried there beneath the big face on Mars, which was carved out in his features. The following article was released by Scientific American. On the subject of the face on Mars, Sitchin wrote in the Lost Book of Enki in 2004 that the face marked the burial place of King Alalu, and the big face with a carved astronaut's helmet covered a cave where the king was buried, and still probably is, up until this day. The existence of the big caverns on Mars, topped by shaped rock structures, was first written about by Sitchin in 2004, 3 years previous to when NASA made the discoveries, or at least revealed them. Sitchin wrote to NASA, who had said in public that they were looking for water on Mars to prove that bacteria exists on the planet, saying, "Where there is water there could be life." Sitchin replied, to conclude that bacteria might have existed on Mars, a possibility that would be indicated by the existence of water, I further wrote in my letter, will hardly excite the public. What would be exciting and highly significant for mankind's past and future would be to find evidence of intelligent life, beings like us, on Mars. The ancient Sumerians asserted so in their texts inscribed on clay tablets. Mariner photographs from the 1970s show possible remains of artificial structures, to leave aside the famed face. To send rovers to find bacterial evidence rather than verify evidence for intelligent beings on Mars, for example in the Cydonia region, is a red herring cover-up. This letter was of course not published by NASA or any other media outlet. Sitchin continues. But the question remains, why had NASA persistently avoided on-site examination of the Cydonia area? In Genesis Revisited, 1990, I reproduced a series of NASA's own photographs, including Photo 035A72, Plate E in the book, that captured a panoramic view of Cydonia, see below. There, clearly, the camera captured a rock carved to look like a human face, of a male wearing a helmet, Plate F in the book, and the remains of walled structures, with two walls forming a right angle, Plate G in the book. Other NASA photographs reproduced in the book showed a lake shore, a water channel outfitted with piers, the remains of a pentagonal structure, of roads leading to elongated buildings. The photographs Mr. Sitchin is talking about are the following. As usual, click on the images to enlarge. Sitchin continues. While in my writings and lectures I emphasize the structural evidence, it was the face that captured the interest and imagination of various individuals and groups. NASA, on its part, ignored all the evidences in its subsequent missions, focusing instead on geology. It was only as a result of a public outcry that NASA finally directed an orbiter, Mars Pathfinder, to take a look at the face, but only after a dust storm that covered most of the planet, and after fiddling electronically with the photographs to end up with a fuzzy picture. Some of the serious work to uncover the distortions was done by the Meta Research Institute under the leadership of the astronomer Thomas Van Flandern. Yet, now distorted or not, the fact remains that the unusual rock is still there, and that it clearly showed a human-like face in the 1970s photographs. My conclusions were and still are that intelligent beings akin to us had been to Mars thousands of years ago. The Sumerians knew who they were, the same Anunnaki from Nibiru who had come to Earth and maintained a way station on Mars. Shortly after I'd completed this paper, I noticed that Dr. John Brandenburg just released a new book called Life and Death on Mars. He spoke with John Brandenburg, PhD, who was kind enough to send me a copy of his new book. He has gathered scientific information, mythology, astronomy, and history in a book about the planet Mars that is so completely entertaining that the reader almost forgets the premise of the author, that everything we thought we knew about Mars is wrong. Mars was actually Earth-like for most of its geologic history and held a massive and evolving biosphere much earlier than Earth. Mars cooled and developed millions of years earlier than Earth with oceans and rivers. Mars was then racked by a mysterious and astonishing nuclear catastrophe. Wes emphasis. This corresponds with the raw material, that both Mars and Maldek were destroyed by nuclear weapons, not by being hit by Nibiru moons, in Maldek's case, or by a electromagnetic catastrophe due to another Nibiru passing, in Mars' case. We are, biologically and culturally, the children of Mars. We could even be a colony of Mars. The new Mars synthesis goes boldly where no human has gone before. On many pages of this book that begins with ancient Egyptian and other cultures' perception of the red planet, named for Mars the god of war, and progresses in a well-written way to our current discoveries that were initiated by the investigation of a meteorite from Mars that fell into Egypt in 1928. What makes Brandenburg's book such a fine read is the manner in which he succinctly traces the history of man from ancient days through the Cold War and the concurrent exploration of space to the photographs of the planet Mars taken by our spacecraft. In the middle of the book are beautiful color photographs of the surface of Mars and its surroundings. But the drama of Brandenburg's book is his discussion of the nuclear catastrophe that turned the once Earth-like planet into a wasteland, going so far as to discuss why we Earthlings are biologically and culturally the children of Mars. All of this is so well written that it reads like a novel, and makes the reader wonder if the book is based on the famous Orson Welles' 1938 radio show The War of the Worlds that terrified the nation. But the fanciful ideas in this book are followed by scientific data that describe findings on Mars that support Brandenburg's ideas. In the end, the author emphasizes that if we are indeed the children of Mars, then we should learn lessons from the past and live life more attuned to the possibilities of nuclear annihilation and take preventive measures. Note: I will be talking about Mars at the MUFON Symposium using some of Dr. John Brandenburg's excellent data. As John states, Mars is the forgotten front of ufology in New Mars synthesis. The synopsis is very telling. As a last note on Mars for now, both L. Ron Hubbard, around 1952, and the Pleiadians have said there were bases on Mars, both used as implant stations, Hubbard, and genetic engineering to a large extent, Pleiadians. So there may have been more going on Mars than even Sitchin has acknowledged, or were aware of. 6. The frequency prison. In the Sumerian cuneiform tablets, they say the gods were always afraid we were going to challenge them. Therefore, they didn't want to give us either from the tree of knowledge or the tree of life, the reason being that if humans were given from the tree of knowledge, they might want to figure out the tree of life. As soon as someone made the least efforts in this direction, the gods, especially Namur, immediately interfered. 6.1 Reptilians and Giants. We have discussed earlier whether the Anunnaki were reptilians of humanoids, so we are not going to detail that discussion here, in particular, but there are a few more thoughts on this that are worth mentioning, because in an upcoming paper, my interview with Michael Lee Hill will tell the story how he met with Anunnaki, who could evidently shape-shift from human to reptilian form. I happened to stumble upon Summit, the collective consciousness of hyperversals, calling themselves Ra, are giving another plausible answer to the reptilian question in one of the channeling sessions in the raw material the other day, which may tie into this. They say that the Anunnaki had an encounter with the Orions while they were still here on Earth, genetically manipulating mankind. They came here, and among other things, mated with the Anunnaki to create a larger and stronger race, which was intended to become the new rulers of planet Earth. The offspring became what Ra calls the Anak, which of course is the same as the Anakim, who were giants, half reptilian and half hominid. These titans then fought a war against the ruling Anunnaki in an attempt to take over. According to the Sumerians, these titans didn't all look the same. Breeding Orion reptilians with hominid Anunnaki resulted in weird mutated offspring. Some giants had 6 toes and 6 fingers, others had 3 or more arms, others had even weirder distortions. However, there are those saying that some of the Anunnaki had 6 toes and fingers too, as did other giants, not related at all to this hybrid group. Sitchin mentions these hybrids as well, but vaguely says that these giants, or titans, were mistakes in the Anunnaki's genetic experiments, but doesn't mention the Orion connection, probably because it was not clearly noted in the tablets. One thing to remember in our thirst for knowledge is that, to expand our consciousness, it's not necessary to grasp everything there is to know. The logical mind is always wondering and pondering over things it doesn't understand. It is the unconscious mind that knows, and it's not logical in our terms, but non-linear and multi-D. There were other giants than the Titans on Earth in ancient days, but from reading Sitchin's books, we must assume that many of the giant stone monuments were built by giants, some of them of enormous stature. Like the Pleiadians say, if you see something big was built, you can make sure it was built by people of impressive stature. Big things were built by big people. Or, as they say about today's visitors, if you see a giant spaceship in the sky, it's not controlled by small people. 6.2 Stuck inside a radio station. Think of everything that exists in a universe as energy. It's everywhere, and it's all that is in a physical universe. It all starts with thought, and thought is what creates energy. There is consciousness in everything from intelligent beings to galaxies, nebulae, stars, planets, animals, plants, rocks, a grain of sand, microbes, atoms, electrons, quantum particles, subquantum particles and beyond. All this put together is God, or all that is, manifesting itself in a physical universe. Everything is connected on a deep subquantum level, as we have discussed in earlier papers. However, things in the universe vibrate on different frequencies, depending on its level of consciousness. A stone is not vibrating on the same frequency as a human. We, Homo sapiens have our own energy field when a soul enters a body on Earth. Depending on the consciousness of the soul and the genetic body and its bloodline, a certain person will vibrate on a certain frequency. This frequency may change during the lifetime of the person. The frequency will either lower or increase depending on the person's experiences and ability to solve problems and recognize learning experiences and actually learn from them. Many researchers are talking about a radio, which is a great metaphor for how this works. If we turn the knob on the radio to a certain frequency band, we get a certain station we can listen to. But whatever is on that station can only be perceived by the ear as long as the knob is still at the same location. If we turn the knob, the radio station is going to have distortions, and then it will disappear and we will soon tune into another station. However, the previous station is no longer audible. Same thing with us, we are stuck on a certain radio station and within this frequency band we emit and receive information. What is outside this small band can't be perceived by most humans. Still, a big part of humanity think that our frequency band is all there is. Do the same people believe that one rock and roll channel is the only channel on a radio, too? No, most would agree that it's natural to have many radio and TV stations, and they would not think it's strange to change frequency bands. Why wouldn't the same apply to us humans? The multiverse is extremely rich on intelligent life and so-called aliens. Most of them, at least those who can space travel, are much more advanced than we are and look upon us as little kids who are trying to grow up, dangerous kids by the way. These aliens have a much wider frequency band they can operate within, and thus their realities, and how they perceive the multiverse differs quite substantially from our own. We are like ants running around, not seeing what humans are doing all around them. We wouldn't be able to see many of these ETs even if they stood before us, because their frequency is so much different. They are often multidimensional and can thus operate on several radio stations at once, while we are stuck on one. How come then that we are so limited? Some say it's because we need to evolve and raise our frequency, one by one, to be able to bleed through to other stations close to ours, different dimensions. Others say, however, that Earth is preset to a certain station, and as long as we live on Earth, we can only operate within that frequency range. We can reach its upper levels, but to expand from there, we need to continue our journey somewhere else. If this is true, it would explain why the Anunnaki are depicted in a certain way by the Sumerians, and are viewed in another way by some people who meet them today and get a glimpse of their real selves. Our higher, interdimensional beings using avatars when they enter our 3D reality, while they actually locate somewhere else, looking somewhat different than the avatar they have created to better being able to mingle with the population already inhabiting a certain planet. The Avatar movie, in this sense, is pretty interesting if we reverse the plot to make the humans who transfer their consciousness into the avatar, aliens. Thus, aliens can walk around on Earth in any city or be in top positions within governments without being detected, which we know is the case. More on this later. Similarly, some, like the Pleiadians, David K. James of the Wingmaker site and others, say that this is the limited frequency band we are living in. On the highly multidimensional level, ETs work with imperatives. They decide as a species what their goals are and in a combined effort they work on accomplishing them. The difference is that it's all in the open, the communication is telepathic and topological, the ability to hold several communications at once, store them in memory, like a RAM computer memory, while holding another conversation with someone else, and then picking up on a previous conversations without losing the thread. You can also have multiple conversations going simultaneously with different people. This can be done by humans. Some humans, such as the members of LPGC, are already doing it when communicating with aliens. The Pleiadians, who are still working with the Lyrans and other creator gods from the cosmos to create, and recreate, the living library, say that when the founders came up the prototype for Homo sapiens sapiens, before the Anunnaki came and distorted their project, they had already put a code into our DNA, which will activate in many people now, during the nanosecond. This activation will help us taking the leap from being third-density linear thinking, to become multidimensional again. Then, there are those who would agree with much of the above, but believe we are stuck in a hologram and a time loop. See David K's work as an example, and we need to realize this first, before we can become multidimensional. K is showing his evidence of this in his new book, Humankind, Get Off Your Knees, The Lion Sleeps No More. Here he elaborates that this hologram is created from the moon. James of the Wingmakers, in his interview with Project Camelot in 2008, has a similar viewpoint, although he doesn't mention the moon as being the source of projection. The Wingmakers option has been discarded by the Life Physics Group, who are saying that the way James of the Wingmakers is describing how we are imprisoned in 3D is an impossibility and can be disproved by general physics. If they are correct, that also more or less rules out K's theory as well. In addition, the LPGC are telling me we are definitely not stuck in a time loop, and they can tell by practicing ENS, extraneurosensing, their advanced form of remote viewing, that this is not the case. Furthermore, they are not very pleased with Barbara Marciniak and the Pleiades. They say that these metaphysical sources are often correct when describing the big picture, but don't know the dynamics. When I bring up DNA with Borden and mention the Pleiadians in the same breath, he gets quite agitated and tells me that it is disinformation and dangerous, because it misleads people to think that we are developing towards regaining some original 12-strand DNA, which was to a large degree deactivated by the Anunnaki to be better able to control us. He says this is simply not true. The Anunnaki did not deactivate our DNA in this fashion. First he said it's impossible to do so, but then elaborates on it and says that even if it was possible, the deactivated strands would grow back within 10 generations or so. The Pleiadians, on the other hand, who have never mentioned the LPGC in their lectures, from what I know, say that even the most advanced scientists today don't know everything about DNA. DNA is not only physical, but expands to the metaphysical planes and further throughout the multiverse. Borden then goes on, attacking Marciniak in person in a way that makes me think we are not talking about the same person. I think he may have her confused with somebody else, because he treats her like if she was a scientist, which she is not. He also tells me he has met Marciniak and blasted her, and she hasn't talked to him since. Curiously enough, Borden is telling his readers in his essay The Link, p.40, that we humans, including scientists and himself, know very little about DNA. So here he goes from being humble, 2007, to arrogant to the extreme in 2011 during his sessions with me. Sometimes we need to listen to our brains, and in that capacity LPGC, with Dr. Borden as a contact person, has been of great assistance, but sometimes we also need to listen to our hearts. When I do the latter and use what I have been taught intellectually by Dr. Borden, I have come to the conclusion that the Pleiadians are right about DNA. In the broader perspective it is making all the sense in the world, while the cutting-edge science, as far as I understand it, which is limited to say the least, does not explain what I am looking for. If the future proves me wrong, so be it, but my personal take on this is that it is science that eventually will catch up with the metaphysical information, something that has happened 100 times before. We will talk much more about 12-strand DNA, in both the first and second levels of learning, and I believe that the reason the DNA is not adjusting itself after 10 generations is because we are held in a frequency prison, just like the Pleiadians, the Guardians, and the Wing Makers, among others, say, and thus we can't receive the encoded light from cosmos needed to develop our junk DNA. Scientists don't know the beginning of what DNA is, and just recently they have started understanding that there is much more to it than they thought. If so, why would it be so outrageous that our metaphysical sources are correct? After all, they are often far more advanced in their thinking and awareness than we are. I have contacted Borden on the DNA subject, and in reply, he sent me a copy and paste of the Wikipedia explanation, more or less, of what DNA/RNA is, which is the mainstream scientific version of it, which I feel, without claiming to at all being a scientist, is very limited and rigid. DNA is fluid and changes accordingly to our thoughts and beliefs, and foremost, our awareness. Later on, someone else, who is very respected in the UFO field, being an engineer, posted something on DNA which upset Borden quite a bit, and he told me that. I explained to him that people don't understand, logically, what DNA is because the explanation out there is often very scientific and hard to understand, even for highly educated people. So, instead of being frustrated, I suggested Borden write a simplified article on DNA/RNA that we all can understand. I wanted to give him a chance to do that to see how his version taps into that of 12-strand DNA, if at all, or if he had something enlightening to contribute on this subject. Borden thought this was an excellent idea, and that he was willing to do this, but he never did, although I reminded him. The Pleiadians say in Barbara Marciniak's book, Bringers of the Dawn. The human experiment has had one radio station on for 300,000 years. Same old tunes. The human experiment was unable to turn the dial and hear a different band, so the same frequency was broadcast. This created a quarantine, emphasis not in original A sealing off of this planet. The creative cosmic rays sent by Prime Creator on the original planners pierce through this frequency shield. They bombard Earth. However, they must have someone to receive them. Without a receptacle, these creative cosmic rays would create chaos and confusion. You, as members of the family of light, come into this system to receive these rays of knowledge. You then disseminate the knowledge, the new lifestyle, and the new frequency to the rest of the population to alter the entire planet. There is of course no doubt that they are talking about us in regards to the Anunnaki DNA manipulation 300,000 years ago, which eventually resulted in Homo sapiens sapiens. There is subsequent information from these beings throughout the years where they name the Anunnaki as being the ones orchestrating this. They also present a solution how to break the quarantine, which was set up by this alien force, who interfered with the plans for the living library, much of what I subscribe to myself, as we shall see. Look at Einstein and Newton. Their conclusions were held as true for quite some time, but are today questioned by scientists who are changing the current worldview, claiming that their new ideas are the truth of how things work. However, we need to keep in mind that Einstein and Isaac Newton were rogue scientists once as well. 7. Gold and longevity. The SID.A.M.I. Inhale gold like some humans are inhaling cocaine. The reason they do this, apparently, is to increase their lifespan. As mentioned earlier, they use gold extensively for this purpose when off-planet, Nibiru, to compensate for the increased speed of time on most planets, which have a faster orbit around their suns, respectively, than Nibiru has. However, not only does gold seem to have an addictive side effect on the SID.A.M.I. Anunnaki, but there are also indications that it may turn them more into machines, cyborgs. The SID.A.M.I. are not the only ones who are using gold for longevity, so were the Orion Queens, apparently, and this may be where the SID.A.M.I. got the idea from. Researcher Ilana says. However, they were unaware that the necessary high-spin state was actually diminished by their heavy metal implants that further bled capacitive charge from their bodies. As they became increasingly cyborg, the males in particular, quite literally lost their fire. The eventual rebellion by the patriarchal cyborg, allied with the Orion unwinged forces, overthrew the domination of the Dragon Queens, and the vengeful pogroms decimated the great houses. A remnant escaped with precious genetic material and a few remaining children, the diaspora spreading throughout the universe. 8. Dr. A. R. Borden's close encounters with the SID.A.M.I. and the forming of the link, annual meetings with extraterrestrial groups. It is time that we talk a little bit about Dr. Borden's own encounters with the SID.A.M.I., which happened twice in his early life, before he started meeting them and a lot of other alien races at least annually, off-planet and on-planet, to discuss humankind's future and more. As you can see, he mentioned his encounters briefly in his email to Dr. Heiser, see section 2 above. I think it's important to give a little background on this amazing man. It is my impression that Borden and the rest of his team are serious and are doing what they're doing in strong attempts to help mankind, although I may not agree with everything they are suggesting when comes to the future of mankind. However, it may be of interest for the reader to know a little bit about Borden's background, because LPGC will most probably play a big part in humanity's immediate future. So let's start with an official piece of biography taken from one of his articles on my own blog. A. R. Borden is a retired itinerant scientist, traveling the roads of America in search of people talented in extended human functions. He is a former deputy director of a corporate research center, former executive director of the American Association of Remote Viewers, and contributing writer to a couple of blogs, one Spanish-language website and a Portuguese, Brazilian, website. He is also author of Fireball, a science fiction novel, and of over 25 screenplays and teleplays. In the early 90s, he was also instrumental in the formation of a scientific cooperative that does research in extended human functions, interface with extraterrestrials, and other anomalies. Since his retirement in 2001, he has devoted himself full-time to writing, as editor of Foundation Reports in Life Physics, lifephysicsgroup.org web link, and is traveling the USA. Source: battleofaearth.wordpress.com web link. I don't know a whole lot about Borden's background, but what he has told me, aside from the above, is that he was born in 1946, and when he was 10 years old, in 1956, while on a fishing trip with his father, who was working for the government, they were both abducted by ETs. They were taken on board a spacecraft and met with tall, Caucasian beings, some of them 7 feet or taller, and bearded. He came to know them as the SID.A.M.I, inhabitants of Nibiru. They sedated his father so he wouldn't remember the details from the abduction, but they let the young boy keep his memories intact, all according to Borden. This was long before Sitchin released his first book, The 12th Planet, in the 1970s. On a few different occasions, Dr. Borden revealed to me that it was through his encounters with this SID.A.M.I group that he got in contact with the present king of Nibiru. I have asked him about more details from this meeting with the SID.A.M.I, but he is very reluctant to tell, which is his choice, and something I respect. Then, in 1981, 25 years later, he had another encounter in Florida, now at the age of 35, this time with 3 Anunnaki who were stationed here on Earth. At one point of another, he had a third encounter, where he, from my understanding, met with the king again. It was not Anu, but the new king, who has taken over after Anu had stepped down sometime in the 1400s. Something we will discuss in the private first-class papers, present and future challenges papers, soon. It's not clear exactly when Borden's meeting with the king of Nibiru took place. I have discussed with Borden the intentions of the SID.A.M.I a few times, and although he expresses doubts regarding their true motives, he told me that in his encounter with the new king, the two made a bond with each other which will not easily be broken. In other words, they became fiends. This to me sounds suspicious at best and dangerous at worst, taking into account that Borden is now working with a faction of SID.A.M.I to make humankind sovereign. Borden stresses that he was allowed to have full memories from his encounters, but the question is, did he really? Or was he made to believe that he had full memories, had screen memories implanted, and perhaps had thoughts implanted which would keep him connected with this faction of the SID.A.M.I, with intentions to be used in the future? How can he be so sure it didn't happen that way? If he says he's sure, I can't say he's wrong, but it's normal alien abduction procedure, after all, so why would Borden be immune to this? It sounds like a thing to do if they want to use him in the future to perhaps create something like LPGC and prepare for their return. So, the abductions, and another very interesting, albeit private, incident that happened to him, that I can't go into here, but which also potentially involved the SID.A.M.I. Borden started what he calls a very advanced physics group in California together with other rogue scientists, to become LPGC. For almost 20 years as of this writing, this group has now researched and built a model for our entire multiverse, which they call the Unum, and have also been meeting annually, and sometimes semi-annually, with this ET off-planet group called the Link for many years. In all meetings, minutes were taken, so they are on record. I have taken part of the synopsis from the last meeting in December 2010, January 2011, and it's very interesting to say the least. A few things from this meeting. which I am allowed to reveal, will be embedded in my private first-class papers. My research, as we shall see in the private first-class papers, strongly makes me believe that Borden and his team are working on a mission they are convinced being of uttermost importance for humanity's future, but my deep suspicion in regards to the C.A.M.I. intentions when comes to Earth makes me object to LPGC's willingness to work with this C.A.M.I. group. When he wrote the Link essay in 2007, he was in a healthy way suspicious about their motives and said that he and his team have their antennas up. Even as late as January 2011, he still kept a suspicious mind towards them. Recently, though, in his communications it sounds like that he is more willing to work with at least one faction of this group. I am not. I have come to an entirely different conclusion regarding the ET issue, which will be presented in the solution papers. Although I think that something like the 3% rule would be of interest for mankind, but hopefully with another goal in mind, which is keeping C.A.M.I. out of the picture, if this is at all possible, which I think it is. One thing I need to mention here is the fact that very few people are abducted without a previous agreement with the abductors. It may be in this life or in between lives, but there are no coincidences. The C.A.M.I. knew what they were doing when they abducted young, 10-year-old Borden and sedated his father in the middle of a fishing trip out in nowhere land. Not a coincidence. The latter happened to be there with his son, but the subject for the abduction was A.R. Borden. They had plans for him, evidently, and on a soul level Dr. Borden has agreed to this for any given reason, and this means the C.A.M.I. have plans for him. I can't see how it could be any different. When I have asked Borden questions about the working model that he and his group have developed over the years, he has been happy to provide me with an abundance of information. He always, with no fail, has replied to my emails within 24-48 hours. I always thought this was commendable, considering he is so busy with other things. However, twice I wrote him long emails explaining why I thought he is being used, and how I came to my conclusions, and he never wrote me back. Instead, after being silent for perhaps a week, in both cases, he wrote me, but on a totally different subject, like if my previous emails didn't exist, perhaps hoping I had forgotten them and now wanted to redirect my attention. I've also noticed that when I question parts of his working model, like when he says a soul can only be indexed to a certain planet once, and on the same account, I brought up Dr. Michael Newton's afterlife research, based on 7,000 case studies, all telling the same story, and in addition to that also mentioned all the metaphysical beings who, through channeling and sensory data streaming, are telling us exactly the same thing. There is only silence. I gave Dr. Borden many fair chances to explain, but instead he has ignored my emails. Therefore, I need to make his silence public, for the records. The Link meetings, which started in 1990 and have recurred every year since then, began as a small group of participants, with Dr. Borden and another scientist as the only participants at first, joined in by a few different ET groups, hosted by a C.A.M.I. group. Over the years, the numbers of participants have increased to sometimes over 200 members, with representatives from different star systems in our own and other galaxies. Interestingly enough, according to Borden's essay, The Link, page 32, there were 57 human contactee, activist groups, 42 invited members and 15 observer members. He doesn't mention, however, who these human groups are. At the time of the writing of the essay, the human participating groups worldwide was 41 and have possibly increased since then. What he is telling us is that these meetings are held by concerned members of galactic and intergalactic species that have no direct connections with their governments, nongov.org, but are there as individuals or concerned groups, who want to discuss intergalactic matters in freedom, and they are particularly here to discuss earthly matters, because we are a species who potentially is at the threshold to becoming galactic members, but are still facing big problems that need to be solved, problems like our negative use of electrogravity and our destructive oil production. 9. LPGC and the 3% rule. The evidence that the Anunnaki were here in our ancient past and genetically manipulated the early humans is overwhelming and can no longer be discarded. Add to this all the present encounters with the same beings, cases I have personally been in contact with, and we get quite a solid picture, not only that these beings existed in the past, but that they are here today as well, at least some of them. There is also little doubt that this race is a warrior race with a lot of issues. Not to say that we humans don't have issues, I'm the first to admit to that. Look at all the wars, all the hunger in the world, power struggles, oppression, the list goes on. Still, we got these traits from the gods, who came down here and mixed their DNA with ours, and in addition, it is unbeknownst to most humans that we are still ruled by ET groups. Moreover, albeit teaching us agriculture and giving us survival tips at times, they were the ones who taught us warfare. So, the dark side of this manipulation is that we have their mindset in many ways and we struggle with this up to this day, and that is one reason why it's been so hard to break our patterns, like going to war and use low-frequency solutions to problems. Another thing we must remember is that those we call the Anunnaki, who came down to Earth, were led by two brothers of the royal bloodline from the planet Nibiru. They do not represent the whole S.A.M.I. species. It's like sending down Prince William and Prince Harry to a foreign planet, God help us, hypothetically being in dispute with each other over whom should be in power. The majority of the population on Earth are not bad people, and perhaps, the same goes for the S.A.M.I. Anunnaki, but they come from somewhere else and have another mindset as a mass consciousness. Needless to say, Prince Ea and Prince Namor act like two spoiled children who don't give up until they get what they want, even if it includes killing off their creation, humankind, in the process, and use us in their pointless wars, like as if they have nothing better to do, and likely they don't. Then, when the disputes get out of hand, they are beaming for Daddy to come and help. When Daddy Anu finally comes, after more people possibly have been killed, they blame each other viciously until Daddy pats them on the head and asks them to please be nice and stop fighting. Although I say this jokingly, isn't this the picture we get, though? What is worrisome is that the kingdom of Nibiru is ruled by either one of these two bloodlines, and the rest of the S.A.M.I. obey their king. It's like having a Democratic and a Republican party, EA's line being the Democrats and Namor's being the Republicans. It's much too similar to the power structure and the hierarchy of power here on Earth in present time. We may have elections and different political parties, but the lobbying is intense before an election, just like on Nibiru, and no matter who becomes the president, ruler, whether it is in the United States or elsewhere, they are of the bloodline, and ironically enough, the earthly bloodlines we choose from are just an extension of the S.A.M.I. bloodlines, our presidents being of royal, S.A.M.I. blood, which has been proven recently and is well documented on my website, IlluminatiNews.com. The same problems continue on from there. Borden says that Anu stepped down in the 1400s and left room for a new king, which is Nannar, Namor's son. This same source says that Nannar was much loved while here on Earth millennia ago, and he is loved on his home planet, but so was Obama here on Earth in the beginning of his presidency. No longer so, though. I don't see the point in appointing a new king from the same conflicting bloodlines and think that now things will improve a lot. LPGC suggests, after have met with this alien group they call the Link for decades, that it may, or may not be in our best interest to connect with King Nannar or his representatives, Nannar being the king with whom Dr. Borden allegedly met, by the way, and work out a solution for mankind for us to reclaim sovereignty of our biokind and the planet as a whole. In short, the king, and other alien species as well, joining in on the annual conferences, are concerned about that we, as a species, don't know our imperatives and can't join together in a combined effort to advance our species enough to be welcomed into the galactic societies, because we can't even solve our own problems here on Earth. Although, this being the truth, of course, it sounds like quite a bold statement coming from someone whose species is responsible for our current condition to a large degree, and not only that, the S.A.M.I. is still a warrior-like race, as far as I'm concerned. Their attempt to convince us that they are now on a more spiritual path is not sitting well with me. I am not trying to put blame elsewhere and suggesting that we should not take responsibility for our own mess. I agree we should, but I think that this time we should do it without the S.A.M.I. being involved, and perhaps then we will succeed. I understand that these people most probably will land here on Earth in a near future, but there are solutions which I will go into later. However, besides from that, according to Borden, not only the S.A.M.I, but the other alien races they are meeting with as well, all being members of the Link, agree with each other that they want to see at least 3% of our world population, around 192 million people, have set imperatives for what the collective humans want for their race before they will take us seriously and leave Earth, the real estate, exclusively in human hands. Apparently, they believe that if 3%, just like with the famous 100th monkey syndrome, the rest of mankind will eventually follow. This is what LPGC is now mainly working on achieving. My own concern is that this whole group of aliens which LPGC is meeting with, appearing to be of different background and unrelated to each other, could from all we know be part of the same galactic federation and not say so to the human representatives. What if they are just manipulating us so that we humans will believe what the S.A.M.I. King wants is also what most other aliens in the group agreed to as well? And if this is the case, they are probably smart enough to have a few aliens on board playing the role of not agreeing, which makes it all seem much more convincing. My gut's feeling here is that things are not what they appear to be. I have tried to get Dr. Borden to reveal more about the alien species whom attend the Link meetings so we can do some intelligence work on them to find out who they really are, and more importantly, if they belong to the same galactic federation. Borden is unwilling to do this, possibly afraid that if he does, he will lose his chair in the Link meetings. This makes me feel uncomfortable, because if ETs are suggesting what we should and should not do with ourselves and our planet, in spite of how good it sounds, they'd better present themselves and give us their biography. I don't take advice regarding our future from anonymous alien sources. On the bright side, I happen to know where some of these aliens, attending the meetings, came from. I know their star systems of origin, but this information is limited, because each star system can, and often is, populated by more than one species. However, at least it is a lead and something I will look into. To understand LPGC's concept of the 3% rule as much as possible, it's important that I quote A.R. Borden directly from his essay, The Link, from 2007, pp. 28. The working model, an emergent model of what is generally defined as life physics, a physics that includes behaviors of intelligent living organisms on Earth, beginning with Homo sapiens, indicates that adaptive behaviors of such biokinds demonstrate the appearance of such behaviors when 3% of its membership demonstrate a change in a particular behavioral set in a given direction. This was originally derived from work with monkeys on the Japanese Kuril Islands, regarding specific behaviors acquired by populations of monkeys inhabiting more than one island, where the behavior was initially demonstrated by one group in one island. Over time, other groups of monkeys began using the new behaviors until roughly 3% of the total population of monkeys learned to crack nuts in the new way. Once 3% of all monkeys, regardless of where they lived, learned to do things in the new way, it then became a new way of cracking nuts for the entire population. We then started looking for minimum behavioral critical mass for behavior change in other living species, and found them to function on this 3% principle. So last year, We began a 4-year 3% project of surveys and focus groups in 67 countries worldwide, including the United States and Canada, through a nonprofit foundation. The general objective of this project is to discern whether or not we humans also function by the 3% principle in regard to general connectivity to each other along specific parameters. We are interested in finding if at least 3% of the people who participate in these scientific field surveys exhibit and manifest patterns of behavioral choices consonant with what we define as general connectivity. You see, the off-world members of the conferencing group tell us there is such a 3% group of humans already. We want to know where, and whether or not the connectivity they speak of to us is related to conscious group-centered self-serving behavior that would constitute pragmatic connectivity within the value system of each of the polled groups. Once a 3% core of each surveyed group is identified, then these members are invited to focused groups to further learn the depth of the thinking behavior and behavioral choices exhibited as propensities through the polling surveys. The second phase of the project is due to begin sometime toward the end of this year, 2007. Wes comment, that is, the focus groups. Why are we doing this? The answer should be obvious to the reader. We do it because this is an attitude, belief set we can then bring to the conference table as one means of correction of off-world group perceptions of who and how we are. What is interesting and most fascinating is that the numbers are now suggestive that we humans also change on the basis of this 3% principle. Even so, the operative word here is suggestive, because the total polling numbers are but a fraction of the actual 3% requirements of the total Earth population, that is, 3% of the 6.435 billion human beings estimated to now inhabit the Earth. 3% of this number would be roughly 192 million souls. Fortunately, there are ways in which to activate this number of people once a neurobehavioral pattern is identified, which can correlate with desirable propensity general patterns. We now have powerful reasons to believe these technologies can and should be employed for and our common behalf as core memberships in polled international groups emerge. To what purpose? The working model indicates that Earth is a bioconnective planet, such that all of its host of living matrices, the biologies of all living things, including us, have the potential to act in unison, as a single organism with one degree of freedom. That is, all brains of these detected memberships, regardless of language barriers, can vote with their hearts and minds on what is best for all of us. Again, this is a capability possessed by most, if not all, of the off-world groups, so why not us as well? They act in accordance to their imperatives. Isn't it about time we started acting in consonance to our own? What these imperatives are we will explore in the course of this book. There are many aspects to what we see them to be. But these, we suggest, are but a mere starting point. I then hope this book will generate discussions in groups who consider what I write here among themselves, with a view of deciphering their own feelings and intellect with regard to what our imperatives are, not what they think they should be, for such would not be an intellectual exercise but a very real act of bioconnectivity and biocommunication across all groups. Interestingly, it is something like what is suggested here that off-world groups have been asking of us. The emergence of such human biomind would facilitate things in ways the reader could not at this point even imagine. So please lend me your imagination that I may show you with my palette of words what it will do for us. What I am about to paint for you in the rest of this chapter and in Chapter 7 is what is most feared by gatekeepers of contact. Yet, it is a most powerful solution to the advent of a dynamic coherence process across the membership on the aforementioned groups, and thereby a start of a dynamic coherence cascade in the interconnectivity of the human biomind. It is this very phenomenon we now understand is the purpose of the series of sites left on Earth by the transversal mentioned by Jameson Neruda in his interviews, the so-called central race. Each of these sites, according to the working model, are nothing short of brain resonance centers that transform minds through art and music and imagery and a powerful emotive bandwidth. It is within this dynamic coherence that we must derive the elements of our own imperatives, and it is most unfortunate that the very gatekeepers who most fear this process are the ones who need it most, yet do not understand it because it is not controllable once Frank Herbert's sleeper has awakened. All anyone can hope for then is that the bio-mind acting as a single degree of freedom organism does what is best for all of us. Therein lay their conundrum, and our positive expectations as raw hope. It is my understanding that if we can achieve the 3% rule before Nibiru passes next time, according to LPGC this will happen sometime around 2060 to 2095, we will stand a better chance to get what we want, instead of agreeing to what the C.A.M.I. want for our future. If humanity can stand more or less united, maybe they will listen. At least, this is LPGC's hopes and plans, something they want us to achieve before the next crossing of Planet X. Would that work? With additional information I have on the C.A.M.I. and the Anunnaki, not mentioned by Sitchin, tells me that the C.A.M.I. are not interested in what we want. It's a waste of time in that respect. They have already planned our future, but in their usual manner, using sophisticated mind control on an already mind-controlled human population. It's easier for them if they can make us agree to what they want. But like I said, the 3% rule is still something to consider, albeit with a totally different goal in mind, which will be discussed in the first-level solution papers. King Nanner's plan, apparently, is for the C.A.M.I. from Nibiru to come down with his people here on Earth at the time of the next crossing of Nibiru, gather all the renegade Anunnaki who are still on Earth and give them the option of either start obeying to the kingdom immediately, or come back to Nibiru, where they will be imprisoned for crimes against mankind. If they refuse both, there will be a war. The Anunnaki leader of the Earth clan will be imprisoned here on Earth in an underground facility for 1,000 to 2,000 years and then get a trial here. Then, 3,600 years from now, or when Nibiru comes back next time, if Bible prophecy is correct, the leader will die. So who is this leader? Anyone who's read my papers thus far would say Marduk, and I, too, would say Marduk. If it wasn't for Dr. Borden telling me a while ago that Marduk died quite recently here on Earth, as did Ninishzida, Tote. We don't know where Ninishzida is buried, but Marduk was first buried here on Earth, but then brought back to Nibiru, probably because his father, Ea, wanted to grant him the right to come home to the home planet for his final rest. Borden says he got this information via his intel, which probably is from information he got from a C.A.M.I. representative during one of the annual meetings with the link. Instead, Marduk's sons, Nabu and Bril, have allegedly taken over the post as Lords of Earth. I am not blowing up this information too much, because I am uncertain of its validity. The C.A.M.I. may have reasons for us to believe Marduk is dead. However, if it's true, the two brothers, or perhaps the surviving one, as the Bible prophecy speaks of one person. Still, things can change and prophecy is slippery, will be the one sent underground for 3,600 years. What will happen to those who supported Marduk and his two sons during all this time they reigned on Earth, were of the same mindset as Marduk, and perhaps even consciously served him as their king? According to Borden, when a safe landing of the C.A.M.I. can take place, they are coming down to take their own and kill off any and all humans who have been associated with Marduk and his clan. Those who chose the wrong side still have time to repent, but if they yet haven't when the C.A.M.I. boomerang-shaped shops arrive, there is no time for forgiveness. Everyone associated with Marduk and his league will be exterminated and punished down to the 10th generation, whereas those who have been loyal to the king of Nibiru, or avoided to be part of Marduk's team, will be blessed down to the 1000th generation. So the punishment for those directly involved will be death penalty, the only restriction the C.A.M.I. law has on death penalty is that a lord should not kill a lord, rarely happens, and a king never kills a lord, unheard of. However, people of lower rank, both on Nibiru and here, apparently can get death penalty. It's been done a lot in the past and is described in Sitchin's books, and it's still being executed on the home planet. Just for the record, this doesn't mean that everybody who has been working for a global elite companies will be killed, only those who consciously work with Marduk and his clan. However, more people than we might think are part of the Marduk agenda. Many celebrities signed the contract, business leaders, religious leader, politicians. There are a lot of people who sold their soul to the devil for fame and fortune, drugs, rock and roll and women in abundance. But humanity is required to take side, either they obey to the kingdom of Nibiru, or the illegal kingdom of Earth. That's when people take sides, and as it is presented, I can't see how this would not ignite a huge war, the War of Armageddon. So, the part of humanity who hasn't been wiped out by cataclysms directly related to effects from the incoming Nibiru or from other catastrophes natural or man-made will be reduced even more in the Armageddon Wars. If Bible prophecy is correct, the Lord, Nibiru, will win the war, and the King of Kings, King Nannar, will show himself for the human population for the first time, fair-skinned and bearded, just like Jesus supposedly was, and around 7 feet tall. Then, when this war is over, King Nannar will come down and announce that he will leave a skeleton crew of his men here on Earth for another 3,600 years, to help us with the transition from being ruled by a negative power, so that we can eventually govern ourselves. Then, if we can stand on our own legs when Nibiru returns once again, about 3,600 years from now, the Anunnaki will leave us alone for good. This is the semi-official version given to LPGC during link meetings. The king then will advise us to adopt their form of government, which is a world king and a democratic setup of government, a little different from the one we have here on Earth. Still, it's going to be a monarchy. This is what has been insinuated by them. Then, according to Borden, we don't know how seriously they will push through with their advice, and if they will actually force us or not. They are telling us that they feel responsibility for us and that they are not without conscience. Their intentions are to work towards us humans becoming sovereign enough to be self-sufficient and be able to defend our real estate towards intruders from space and elsewhere. All this they will teach us over the next 3,600 years. LPGC is, according to their spokesman, probably still, when it comes down to it, ambivalent about King Nannar's solution for Earth. They are still quite suspicious about them and are not yet sure that this is what mankind wants and needs. They are hoping that we can reach some kind of 3% mankind agreement on imperatives for the human race, but if the C.A.M.I. come and we have not reached our 3%, meaning mankind is still scattered in the wind, not knowing what we want, what can LPGC really do? Will they sign up with the Nibiru King? Probably. Borden said at one point that LPGC will possibly be ambassadors to the C.A.M.I. and the skeleton crew who will be left here on Earth to govern us when all other governments on Earth are defeated. He told me that this was his understanding. The C.A.M.I., as Borden puts it, will come down heavy-handed, and most, if not all, governments know about this, and it's also written in hidden form in many sacred scriptures. The Technical Assistance Corp, again Borden's words, which will be left here on Earth are firmly going to implement what they believe is best for us. However we look at it, and however good it may sound to some people, I can see how the C.A.M.I. are bringing down their wars to Earth all over again, and we are stuck in the middle as usual. What guarantees do we have that things will be different this time? We don't have any, from what I can see. These questions, raised here, are serious ones, and I personally don't buy into King Nanner's solution. I agree with LPGC, who are very firm with that we need to protect our biology, but in my book, figuratively and literally speaking, the Nibiruans are not a species working towards our best interests, but in theirs. They are mainly service to self, SDS, not willingly giving up their real estate. I truly believe that what they are telling us about letting us be sovereign is disinformation and manipulation on their part. Another thing to ponder, this alien race is millions of years ahead of us in their evolvement, and still I can see people on Earth, and I include myself among them, who can look at life with love and compassion, able to see where that can bring humankind as a whole. This does not seem to be the case with the S.A.M.I. Anunnaki. I see a race who is still quite service to self-oriented, and I'll give you this, but what is in it for me? Mindset. The last word on this is far from spoken, and I will give this a whole lot more attention before we're done with these papers.